and everything that she's done in relation to the Singapore Convention and all that. So lots of good. So Adi, wonderful conversations we've had, and it's always a pleasure seeing you, conversing with you. So thank you again for being part of this symposium. But every time, Adi, you still have to talk about yourself a little bit, and then we'll go. I'll talk about the symposium after that. So please, Adi.
Thank you very much, Vikram. Thank you for having me again. Always a pleasure, I must say. I'm always going to be amazed about your never-ending energy and the stamina to do this, to convene the world of mediation stakeholders. So kudos to you. About myself, I'm a full-time mediator. Have celebrated 21 years, I think, recently. 10 years full-time, working almost full-time with Leonardo D'Urso as part of ADR Center's team, promoting mediation worldwide by providing mediation services, mediation training services, and consultancy services for ministries of justice, governments, international organizations to develop different mechanisms to promote, to apply mediation. May it be a workplace system that is looking to prevent and manage workplace disputes effectively, may it be a grievance mechanism from clients or other stakeholders that are sending concerns, and mediation is one of the items on the menu that different mechanisms would respond to those concerns. So this is what I do. As I said, for many years, I love my job. I think this is probably one of the best jobs in the world. Basically, I like to give this example of every time I meet a former client. I'm talking about mediation specifically now. You build trust with people that they will just, oh, hello, how are you? It's like it's very difficult to have a client that is not happy with you. Even if you do a decent job, you don't have to do a perfect mediation job, but just by the genuine interest in really listening to people, in learning, where they're coming from, what their past looks like, where their pain is, really not only the visible pain, but also those hidden spots where people are not too forthcoming about unless they really trust you. So that gets you as a mediator to meet people that are very happy with seeing you again. So it's wonderful. It's a wonderful feeling. So this is me. In short, a pair of hands. I'm trying to help if possible. So what can I do for you today, Vikram? What's the topic for conversation?
Yes, exactly. You've given me a good point to get this in. This is what we are doing today. Mediation legislation. Of course, the questions are out there. They how, what, when, where, which, who, why. But of course, in any order that you want to talk about it, because yesterday, I think yesterday, today only, Shantanu was saying why should be the first one. So why not? Everyone starts where they want to. I just put them alphabetically. So we can always do reverse alphabetically, anything. So there's no order anywhere. But the idea being that let's talk about legislation, and it's an important thing. These are important questions, and any more questions that you have. So 50 plus speakers, 30 plus countries. Of course, it's on YouTube, so you can watch it. And mediatorvikram.com is where you find basic information about what I do. I need to put it out Adi, only because I keep saying that this makes life easier for me if people can actually subscribe to the YouTube channel. I schedule any event, you get a notification. It makes life a lot easier, because otherwise I end up doing so many things. People would miss posts. Like this Magic in Mediation is a new series I've started. So now there'll be episodes of that coming up next week. Michael Lang is coming, Andrea is coming. Then we'll have your session. I will schedule something for you. So similarly, there's lots of things I keep doing, and I don't want people to miss out on it, because then there'll be so much more which will come. This will go, like Ken's session is out there, and it's been a lovely session it was. So this way people don't get to know. So it's a good way to find it here. And of course, all the various things you can find about the World Mediation Circle. I won't speak about it. We don't take your time, but all the events and all this there. So that's about it, Adi. Now it's about you and mediation legislation. So please.
Thank you. When I gave you the cue, people will think that we actually directed that. Let us keep the the suspense alive about that. Mediation legislation. I would start with another question. Why not? Just to perhaps propose a different perspective. As we know, there are different theories, different ideologies, different approaches with respect to what mediation is. I always say that you just have to open a book to see how different mediation is defined in literature, in legislations. So when we talk about mediation legislation, we really have to contextualize, perhaps we're talking about legislation of a specific type of mediation. And we see different countries with different examples. In some countries, mediation is defined very broadly, in other countries very specifically. In some countries, it's something that is paid by the public sector. In some countries, it's paid by the actual users. In some countries, the system is really open. I mean, you just print a business card and you just go out and mediate. That's it. You don't even need a legislation for that. In some countries, you really need to go through a thorough accreditation process, and in some countries, it's really up to the parties to whether initiate a process or attend an information session or whatever to stay for a first meeting. Whilst in other countries, you really have to do these things, or some of them at least. So there's different levels of shades of gray with respect to how centralized these different systems are and how mandatory, or how much push is there in the legislation, if there is any legislation. So we really have to understand that there is a wide spectrum out there, and we have to be respectful of different, I would say that factors like how old is that, culture, what are the cultural parameters, what kind of democratic values are actually present in that specific society. It goes back in the history, it goes back in so many directions to actually really understand different countries and how they look at this, whether there should be any legislation, and what that legislation should that be. Should that be like minimum, only referring to accreditation mechanisms, and that's it, like ensuring the minimum standards for quality, looking only at the supply side, or whether it should also look at the demand side and generate some artificial demand by requiring some efforts to mediation. And obviously we see different opinions all over the world. With respect to the first side, the supply side, also some legislations prescribe a very detailed process, which makes it very difficult to be called mediation, since you really have to do step one, step two, step three. It kind of strips away all the the flexibility that you need as a mediator and really a generous space to offer to parties, and that space perhaps should only be limited by the principles that underpin this process, that are found in the international standards and practice, such as do no harm, and let's make sure that this will not be something that will hurt anyone, any participant, making sure that it's as private, as confidential as parties would like it to be, making sure that the ultimate decision makers around process and outcome are the parties. So once we have this clearly established, then the space should be as generous as possible, without the legislations prescribing should be that way or that. So this is really an overarching theme to even the concept of mediation legislation, to really understand that we may speak about completely different things in Europe as opposed to, and in different countries in Europe, because there are so many different applications, and as well as in other parts of the world. Obviously, when you have a huge country that is regulated, where mediation is regulated, you will have specific. I'm not saying that these countries are large or not, but think about Italy and Turkey, where there are some requirements to mediation. Turkey is reporting millions of mediations in the past few years, which sounds really, I mean, it's beyond impressive. It's almost unbelievable, but it is true. And obviously, when you have a country like that reporting millions of mediations, and then for the first 2 hours, if I'm not mistaken, for the first session, the government will pick up the bill in terms of family, commercial mediation, labor mediation. Actually, it's labor and commercial mediation. Families in Azerbaijan, where I was last week, actually, it sticks in my memory. So when you have a jurisdiction like that and you really look into incorporating mediation in the civil circuit, or in relation to the courts, or in relation to the court system, where obviously there is a public dimension because the government is paying for that system, and obviously you need to ensure all the safeguards for the rule of law, then the need for legislation, for policy, for regulation becomes higher. So the more you want to get it in the public sector, may it be that the public has to pay, or you get it connected to the courts, or with respect to the court processes, the higher is the need for regulation. And we have many examples around that. However, there are countries where mediation is not introduced to decrease the caseload from the courts. Mediation is introduced to help people, like as simple as that. So what if we just create this process so that people can take the benefit from it? Full stop. Do we need legislation? No, we don't need it. Let the mediators organize in professional associations or providers, and they can create their own policies, their own standards, their own ethical codes. They can consult users if they're smart. So they make sure that users are on board with respect to those policies or quality assurance mechanisms. But otherwise, we don't have to push those standards as a minimum for every single mediator in this country, or in this organization, or in this jurisdiction, because every case is different, and the family case will be different from a community, barking dog or loud music case, a very difficult commercial case with a lot of lawyers and law firms and briefs and all that would be different than a workplace conversation, or a workplace mediation, where you just have the person, which may not even be a professional mediator, by the way. It may be the human resource person that is facilitating a conversation for two employees of that organization, and it works. It's called mediation, and look at Netherlands, and they're reporting tens and thousands of cases like that, and they're mediations. They don't need to be members of Mediation Federation of Netherlands to do that. But however, if you want to work in relation to the courts, then there is a higher standard. So see, even in Netherlands, which is the last example I used, there are different layers, different levels of accreditation, or different assessment processes that you have to go through to have access to different types of cases. And that would make sense in some way, I think. We have to really accept that quality is defined differently, and the process should be as flexible as possible, and then things should unfold organically. The problem is then, now I'm going to flip the coin, and I'm going to talk about leaving things too organic. What happens then? Well, what happens then is that you see what I like to call, and you did hear me, Vikram, talking about this, the field of 1,000 roses, wild roses. which in principle is a beautiful field, because you see, if you look from far away, you see this, it's beautiful. I mean, I was actually in Netherlands. I was in Leiden talking to students of Leiden University just 10 days ago with my good friend Alina Leovano from ICC. And we saw, you know, those fields of tulips. They're just amazing. Same with, you know, the tulips. They are not wild, actually. They were planted there, and there is someone actually making sure that, you know. And let's apply this to the field of mediation. This is a process that is, I don't think is widely recognized by the world, not yet anyway. It is recognized in some countries, and it's well established, actually, even in some countries, in some organizations, and for some types of cases, but not widely recognized. The point I'm making is that when two children are having a fight, the school is not teaching them that in case they are not able to find consensus among themselves, they may benefit from the use of a mediator that may be a peer mediator, or maybe some other type of mediator. Peer mediator meaning, as we know, a colleague that may have this ability to support. May it be that that colleague receives specific training, or has like an ad hoc intervention, which we do actually sometimes, because if, you know, if I have two friends that are fighting, I may try to help them settle, although technically that process is not called mediation, because, you know, if they're my friends, probably I care about them, and it's not really that I'm not impacted by what they decide. It's like, you know, when we try to help our children settle, we love our children, but we're not really mediating in those cases. So going back, the society is not looking at this as automatic, you know, I need to be educated. Where should I go? You go to school. I mean, you know, I need to improve my health. Where should I go? You go to the doctor. That's an automatic reaction that the brain tells you. It does not happen in case of conflict that we cannot manage on our own. We usually go to either some sort of authority. I mean, we may go to what I like to call conciliation, which is like, you know, I may go to someone if I have an interest to maintain the relationship with the other party. I may go to someone to kind of conciliate or help us reconcile, but usually I go to some sort of authority. May it be my parent, my professor, my boss, or a judge. And now we're getting to the mediation legislation piece, because this is what we're taught to do when we are adults. We go, you know, we seek some authority so that the other authority will you know, influence the other party, since we are not able to. And that's what the society tells us. So the point I'm making is the following. The conversation that we see on, and I'm sure you're seeing this conversation in your sessions, Vikram, is whether it should be mandatory or not. It's, you know, it is so unfair to boil down the conversation to this question, because it's what should be mandatory? You know, what exactly should it be mandatory? What shouldn't be? How that mandatory? How that application of that model should be put in practice. I'm writing right now a report for the Republic of Moldova as we speak. I'm working on that report, and we boil down at least 20 criteria that actually define different applications of mandatory models. 20. And with the right fine-tuning, it could be that legislation could be that factor that improves education. And the point I'm making is the following. You know, we see in the world of mediation, we see this chain of weaknesses that we have to break. Is the chicken and the egg chain. No quality, because no practice, and no practice because there's no quality. So somewhere we should break the chain. Somewhere we should do something. The point I'm making is that with education, there are not going to be good mediators as much as we try. Good mediators are good because of all their repeated opportunities to practice. Vikram, you're getting good because you're listening now. You know when to interrupt. You know when to ask a question. That's why you're so good at it. Probably the best in the world in terms of organizing these talks. Are you doing now a better job than your first? Oh yeah, I think you do. I think you. I mean, I see you nodding, but you may push back, which is your right. I'm not saying that you should.
I agree with you. I'm always agree. Evolution of a mediator. That's what I.
Yeah, exactly. So you see my point. You start something, you can be as good as you can be, but you do it repeatedly. You don't mediate now and you mediate in 2 months' time, and then you have 3 more cases in 2 months' time. But otherwise, you need another job to pay the bills, or you mediate 3-4 days a week, and you spend the 5th preparing, or the last 2 days preparing. What kind of mediator are you then? I think you'll be a much better mediator. So the point I'm making is when we have mediators having opportunities to practice like this, then the quality will go up. It's not the training. Never. The training can get you so far. But how can we get to that practice since we see, and I think it's a matter of, it's not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of data right now. Where many mediations are happening and where many mediations are not happening. Go to jams and see many mediations, see many mediators, then you will see quality, that's for sure. In the US, go to Turkey. Those mediators that are processing millions of cases, there must be some of them formalities. I think we all agree to that. I'm just applying, so I get the piece of paper, I go to court. Fine. But go to, I don't know, TOBB in Turkey, which is the mediation center for the Chamber of Commerce, where they don't accept the mandatory mediation. They only do voluntary for many reasons, which I'm not going to get into. But think about their mediators who are every day on the job. So the point I'm making is that if legislation can help us with at least some consideration of mediation, not with having the full mediation process mandatory, but at least one first meeting with a very reasonable fee, with a very reasonable time. Perhaps all these mediators that get trained and get very enthusiastic, but then the enthusiasm goes down, will have a chance to maintain their curve of enthusiasm by actually doing the work, by actually talking to all these people and saying, hey, I understand that it's the legislation that invited you to be here. You may not want to be here. But since you're here, perhaps there is an opportunity for us to unpack the issues just for half an hour. And we can have a conversation about whether I could be of any help, or any mediation could be of any help. And then it's up to you to decide whether you want to go ahead with the full mediation or not. The data is, in not my opinion, the data from Italy, from Greece, from Turkey, from countries, is saying that when they decide to go ahead, it's voluntary mediation. And when they do that, the settlement rates are almost the same than the mandatory mediation, perhaps 10% lower. So now, instead of having 60 to 70% the settlement rate, or 75, you have 50 or 55. But the point is that unless you do that, unless you don't find such, it has to be a balanced requirement. You don't want to push the entire process. You don't want to start too large. You perhaps want to test for some cases and for a period of time, and then decide whether to. So governments can actually set up these, what I like to call tasting areas. Just taste it for a while. No harm's done. For, a few, like 5% of the cases, see how it goes. And if it works, then you can develop, you can expand, you can change. If it doesn't, you can stop. It's up to you, really. But that's my main point around mediation legislation, because if we are only going to focus on accreditation, on quality, on supply, on prescribing a process, the mediation will always hit the wall of cultural unacceptance in most parts of the world. I'm not talking about those areas where mediation is well established and people say, come on, Adi, you just live in a remote area in Craiova, Romania. Who heard about Craiova, Romania? Come on. Maybe they're right. But I'm talking about my, jurisdiction, my area, and perhaps some of the 30 plus where I worked as far as a mediator or ADR consultant. Countries, 30 plus countries, and I saw this trend of mediation really not being respected, really not being understood, and there is an opportunity for policymakers through legislation to do that. Now that has to be very careful because it's a very sharp knife, and in Romania we did not use it properly. We actually made mediation mandatory, but it was such a poor model. It was mandatory only for the plaintiff. The defendant could ignore. So it turned out to be a formality, 2 years, and the Constitutional Court stopped it because, to make things worse, the plaintiff was sanctioned with case inadmissibility in case they wouldn't attend this first information session on mediation. It was wrong in so many ways, free of charge for parties. Mediators could not charge a fee, not even their logistical expenses like the electricity, or it was it was pushed by a group of MPs, not by the government. The government said no to the proposal, and there was no monitoring mechanism, no really mechanism to really count, to see whether it's going. It was all, anecdotic data it was a very poor experience. So if someone in any corner of this world would like to learn, reach out to me. I'll be very happy to put together a best, biggest 10 mistakes in incorporating mandatory legislation in with respect to mediation. But if you're smart, if you're doing, if you're taking the time to think about the right model, put all these, sensitive details in place, perhaps ask Leonardo D'Urso, my colleague, who's representing the Italian model, which is praised to the extent that some people, I don't want to hear about Italy anymore because it's Italy. We heard enough. We don't want more. But the reality is reality. They are, and you just have to go and visit. You will see, mediations and 500 plus mediation organizations. Each mediation organization with several offices, because the application is within the jurisdiction of the court where you have to file, so they open more offices. It's everywhere, and the system has the lawyers on board, which is so important. I know people will say, yes, they're taking advantage of the parties. They have to pay the lawyer, they have to pay the mediator, so we can discuss. I would push back because actually I think if you look in the long run, you will see a 34% decrease in the courts of the cases that actually those people will spend years and years in the courts ending up paying more money and spending more time, for sure, more frustration to get those cases settled. Otherwise, again, 34% less cases in those types where mediation is, the first mediation session is mandatory while the full process is voluntary. How do we get there? Very simple. There are two stages. A technical stage where you bring experts to actually tell you how to fine-tune all those details, so you don't end up by wanting to change a Mercedes and make it better, but put a different engine, different, whatever, ends up a different car not working. And then you ask yourself, why is not working? Because we use the Mercedes format, of course, you changed it. So that's the technical stage where you bring experts to tell you how to do things. But then it's called the political dialogue, when you have to discuss those, drafts with all the stakeholders, not within the political spectrum, but within the the stakeholders of mediation, bring the lawyers on board, bring the judges, bring the private sector, bring the academia and the trainers and so on and so forth, so that everyone kind of has a chance to influence the model before it's being enacted. And obviously that process is called mediation, because you have to bring them all on board, and you will see all the different shapes and sizes I started with, having different opinions, and nobody is a prophet in their own country. So you need someone from outside that can actually facilitate and manage without being accused you have your own interest, because no, you say I'm not going to mediate in your country. My interest is to make sure that this is going to be successful, and that's it. So anyway, this is you, Vikram, asking me a question and me answering for 30 minutes.
Oh, that was really
Did we think
interesting.
that would be possible?
Look, it's never possible. 30 minutes is always never enough, but let's try. But I think the good thing that you started off, I mean, this aspect that you spoke about, evolution of a mediator by actually doing those mediations and I mean, evolving yourself. I mean, it's not, and everyone has their way of evolving. So I think that's an important thing. And that's why I feel that I keep telling people, whenever you get the opportunity, reach out to people. If you feel that you want to do this, reach out to people, say that, okay, come, please, let me assist you. So you'll have to do that. And even these young people, these students talk to me, we want to sit in a mediation. No, you don't sit in a mediation. You go out, ask people if they have a dispute, tell them that this is a process they should use, say that you will be a mediator and you have the support of senior mediators. I'm calling them senior. I don't still feel there's no concept of seniority in terms of age or even practice. I don't really consider, but you have that support. So I'm creating that kind of a model where they can actually do things on their own, and they can get Adi in when they feel that Adi should come in, because they should never come into a mediation thinking that they are just there, like Victor was saying, fly on the wall. I don't want them to feel that way, because they might be doing a much better job. Who knows what capability? There's no concept of age, anything. I don't consider all these things. It's a person, what they bring. So this is, I think, the important thing that I keep telling. Well, I mean, okay, this is my model, which I still feel, of course, I am going to get there, get people out there, do this. But I think that's my way of, and then I think what you hit the nail on the head about the aspect of evolution, because that's the only way you'll evolve. That's the only thing, when you're actually sitting in an actual mediation and doing it on your own. This is your mediation. Don't consider it, oh, I've got Adi's mediation, I'm just going to sit there and watch. No. So that's, I think, important. But at the same time, I think I'll get into other parts. But while we are talking about the structure that you feel should be created, please talk about remuneration aspect of mediators also in this, all these various types of mediations, mandatory mediation and all these that you've looked at. Let's look at remuneration, and then we'll go into the other areas.
Sure. Remuneration or fees or costs refer to what I like to call the successful business model that you need for the entire ecosystem. Okay, so it's not only about the fees that the mediators charge for their services. Some relate those fees to the time spent in mediation, others just take a lump sum, whatever time would be spent, and the others have combinations of the two, perhaps. Different, really, several models. No, I'm referring to, because this is costs either for government, if the government is paying, or for the parties, right? But mediators have costs also. You have costs to have an office, to keep the office open, to pay for the Zoom subscription, to be able to mediate online, internet, whatever. I mean, different types of costs. But not only. The government has also costs. If the government, creates a framework for mediation, then the government is always thinking, how much money are we going to spend from the public budgets to implement this framework? And if it's going to be too expensive, then we have to really think carefully. Look at Turkey, for example, and and I hope that we will see some reports from the Turkish government with respect to the savings from the judicial side of it, given all those settlements that are happening in mediation, thanks to the investment of the government. It's the public funds, at least for the first 2 hours. But it's also the government, the lawyers will make a very strong case and say, hey, if I bring my client, where was it when I heard this example? It was somewhere where they said, it was something like, I charge this if I'm in mediation, and I charge like 10 times more I can make if I'm taking this case to litigation. What about that? How can we look at costs from that perspective, And then obviously there's a conversation we can have. How much time are you going to spend in the court with that case? How much time are you going to spend in mediation? I mean, we can have that efficiency conversation and whether it'll have more time for other cases and more, more satisfied clients and for the family. But at the end of the day, a person would just compare 200 with 2000 and will tell you, of course, I advise my client to resolve in a short time frame and with minimum psychological and financial and time resources spent. But however, if my client will say we'll go to litigation, that's not too bad of an alternative for me, to be honest. So in all honesty, when we talk about costs and fees, we have to think about who's paying some money, who's making some money, and who's losing some money. And we have to think about that holistically with respect to all stakeholders if we really want to have a conversation, because then we're going to go deep in the conversation and we're going to have really, I'll tell you an example. If the fees are prescribed by the law to be very low in terms of value, then mediators may not be incentivized to spend their own time. Maybe they send their secretaries to call the parties. Do you want to settle? No. Do you want to settle? No. Thank you. Come and sign the papers. How about that for mediation? Talking about formalities and implementing a policy just like a formality, right? Can it happen? Of course it can. So that's why for me, it's not about the mediation fees per se and the fact that, different mediators require different fees. And in some countries, the fees are regulated, at least for the mandatory schemes, so that no one will abuse those schemes. For me, it's about whether the system is financially sustainable, whether there's a sustainable business model, because if that's the case, then we're onto something. Then we have a model that at least has a chance of working. But you have to bring all the stakeholders in the conversation right in the early stage. You don't pass the legislation and then you start promoting it just to hear things like, we were never consulted about this. We had no idea about this. Why are you doing this? I mean, then I think it's just that policy is set for failure, most likely, although there were exceptions. So yeah, this is my answer to the point of fees.
But how would you actually look at it? I mean, this is, of course, the general aspect, what should be considered and everything. But just a model that Adi has taken out, there is an X country, and Adi is brought in as consultant.
I'm not going to give examples.
This is X country.
Yes, it will be
any X country. Adi's been brought in. Look, we want to create this. So first thing, of course, Adi would ask, what is your population? Or would he not ask that? I don't know. I'm just putting things out what you would ask, but you create that country. You create the country, size of the country, everything you create, and create the way it's going to be structured. Because obviously it's important to be structured from the benefit of the mediator, because I was told, it's not very recently I got to know that mediators are required in mediations. So I think we have to take care of them also. So from that perspective, in terms of legislation, the court system, remuneration, standards, qualifications, and everything. So this is your country. You have to legislate, you have to create everything. Please do it for something.
I would you may not like what I will say, but nevertheless, you may not want to hear this. This may not be the answer to your question, but I'm going to share it anyway. So talking about the Chris Voss's accusation audit, right? So I'm safe now. Look, no mandatory requirements, no public dimensions in the way that mediation is implemented. My recommendation would be no regulation of fees. Really, I mean, you don't need to let the market decide. Or, I'm talking about countrywide, we're talking about that country. However, for a provider of services, it may be that they want to create clear language in their mediation rules so that it's predictable for the parties what's going to happen if they're going to submit a request for mediation. It may be that those mediation rules prescribe certain fees or certain formula for fees, like an hourly rate, or it may be different fees according to the value in dispute. There are different models. But the predictability is always helpful. It may be that you have to send an email and you say, country X, mediation provider Y, mediator Vikram, we want mediator Vikram who's working for you. Can you send us his fee schedule? So at least we would know whether we can afford it. So having predictability is helpful. However, if the regulation proposes the first meeting, having the cost for that first meeting regulated is always helpful. And yes, there's not a formula related to the minimum salary or something like that. Perhaps, for example, in Italy, it's 40 euro. But it was changed recently. The policy is changing. Actually, the model is expanding because of openness from all stakeholders, and the fees are going up actually a little bit. So we should stay tuned and see what happens. But the point is that there is no magic formula that you just put together some open the doing business report and then calculate some numbers and just come up with a formula. You just consult stakeholders. You go about and consult mediators and administrators of mediation centers and ask them, assuming there will be some cases where parties would be mandated to attend, what would be your cost, depending on various hypotheses and the types of numbers of cases. And then obviously there would be some calculation of the costs and whatever would be the minimum value acceptable for a provider to charge, or even an ad hoc mediator, by the way. And then obviously you'll go to the consumer side. You'll ask the private sector companies, you'll ask the consumer associations what would be reasonable, and obviously they'll say zero, the government should pay. And then there will be part of that negotiation, that mediation, to discuss what would be a fair amount that would. But I know this is a sticking point. It's a sticking topic for conversation. But on this value, actually, around this value, it can be built a very solid mediation system. Because if you go back in time and you will see, take Italy, for example, that I have mentioned. I think right now, 10% of all mediations are voluntary. 10% of, 200,000 per year are 20,000 mediations. Do we think that those 20,000 mediations will be organized if there would not be the first meeting legislation? I don't think so. I honestly don't think that. First of all, you need lean offices. You need really to make sure that the people, when they set foot, it's just like a train station. Take a train station. If we go to the airports, maybe we like it because it smells nice. There are those shops, and it's fine. 1 or 2 hours, we say it's fine. But if the place would be smelly, if the place would be really dirty, and would you go happily there? You say, oh my God, I have to go to that place again. It's the same with mediation centers and mediation offices. These things cost money. You need to maintain, you need to, how do you pay for that? We have to be realistic. I think the age of, Kumbaya and Mozart has ended, and we have to, call things as they are. There has to be an effort that has to be made. And some governments are happy to make it, which is great, because obviously it funds this initial effort that is needed to ensure that infrastructure where people will say, well, that felt nice, that was nice, I like it. I was offered a tea or a glass of water or coffee, the place is clean, I like it, it's comfortable, I sat for half an hour and I was respected. Why not? These people actually are doing a good job. But if they kind of invite you in a kind of like garage place, welcome to my mediation office, well, what's going on? This is like so you see my point? It's really, really important in that country X. So when the system is designed, probably that has to be the first thing in people's minds. How can we put together a cost that actually is not preventing people from accessing mediation? So it really has to be really reasonable, but still enough for mediators to fund the expenses of these offices. May it be small or larger offices, is up to them. And obviously, at the end of the day, I always say more mediation doesn't mean more respect for mediation. So what's important is not really how many mediations are happening. It's not even how many settlement rates. I can give you examples. I can talk to you about tomorrow about some of my mediations where people said it was not perfect in terms of how we felt. It was the process. It was like, if this person uses one word that person doesn't like, then that person will say the mediation doesn't feel nice. I didn't feel respected. I didn't come here to feel insulted. They may threaten, they may accuse me. You allowed for me to be threatened. So it may be a nice looking office. It may be a nice, I may have nice everything. But if the feeling when they leave is like, yes, it smells nice, but it doesn't feel nice in mediation, then they would not like to come back, even if they settle. It's like when you go to the dentist and you incur pain. You say, maybe there are other doctors where it's not so much pain, So this is what I'm saying. As long as there is comfort, as long as there is psychological comfort, then the system has a chance. But it's not only about the amount of money that people pay. It's way more than that.
But beyond that, I will want you to, in that X country, in the entire legislation and everything, we'll get into that. But before that, let me point one thing out, that the aspect of Turkey is being discussed. Of course, ASEAN came in, but we only had a small session. So she's coming in again on Saturday, because I think that's really important to discuss Turkey. Because one thing that came out from that discussion, I mean, again, when we meet, I'll discuss that aspect, that we talk about labor cases being a huge number which is going through mediation, and there is, in terms of statistics, a lot of activity there and settling happening. But I think what came out from that was that, is it really something that people are going back saying that they were happy doing it, or was it because power imbalances and they don't have much of a choice, so they are settling? So that part of it, we have to be a little careful, because that, in terms of going back and saying, oh, this is a good process, everyone should try it, or is it, I just had to do it and I was like helpless, and then you go back with that kind of feedback, which is not good for mediation. So what do you think about that?
Look, we can be critical about everything in life, but I think we cannot not appreciate the effort that the Turkish government is making to promote ADR. It's not perfect. No one is saying it's perfect, but they have achieved something. In terms of reporting, I'm not sure, but I would bet that Turkey is reporting more mediations probably than almost all the other countries in the world put together. and even if they're not reaching the same number, I think they're having a good chance. That must mean something. It means political will. It means that the government is really trying to make that happen. And I will tell you that much because I was involved with Leonardo D'Urso and ADR Center in a huge project implemented by the Council of Europe with respect to promoting ADR. Actually, there is a website. The project has a website on the Council of Europe, Turkey's page, where you see all the activities and all the things that were done. And you will see there that among the activities that were conducted for mediation, one of them referred to increasing professionalization, the level of professionalism by creating an accreditation system for mediation centers. Because what Turkey did, they created this model based on ad hoc mediation only. Basically, each mediator would manage their own case, essentially. And what happened were some 300 plus mediation centers that emerged organically without even accreditation. I mean, people like you and me saying, come on, guys, we need let's share the space, let's share the secretary, it's just natural to do that. But the problem is that the secretary, she may be mine, but not yours. And then how can she or he have access to case information from your case? See what I'm saying? So they ended up having some challenges in the way these centers were created. Who are the partners? Who are the owners? And bottom line, they realized that they need a standard for these centers to make everyone's life easier. So what I'm saying is this: probably Turkey is at the top in terms of political will, wanting to incorporate mediation. I would encourage any government to talk to the Turkish government and really ask, why did you do that? You know, what are the benefits? How much money is the government actually saving by investing in this model? What are the lessons learned from all these millions of cases? Where are these cases formal? How can we prevent those in our own countries? How can we adopt policy that doesn't? So what we would like to learn from your mistakes. You know, more mediations, more mistakes. So that's my answer, Vikram, about Turkey. And I always say that they should be proud for all the attempts, because we see what's on the other side of the pendulum. Government saying, well, we adopted the law, now it's up to you, promote your work. I mean, that's what else do you want from us?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, but I think it's important. That's why I'm saying that I kept a separate session again with her, because I really want to understand it. There wasn't enough time, but she took us through it, whatever's happening. But I think we have to get go a little deeper as to how it works out. But because, but again, on the X country, we're back to the X country. What does the legislation look like? And of course, this whole thing of certifications, accreditations, training part of it. How do you look at it? Please.
Accreditation and certification, that's the question.
And legislation, but what does the legislation look like? What is the whole structure?
Okay. Well, we have about 5 minutes, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. I would suggest this, and this is our methodology, really. We look at 3 dimensions. The first one is building the demand in a sustainable way. What do we do to build demand? And probably the legislation should respond to that. Some countries are going for push strategies, which is sanctions and obligations. Other countries are going for pull strategies, which is incentives, right? Fine. Push or pull, they're all artificial demand, right? Which is also fine for starters, as long as there is more respect while this model is being implemented. That's the key element. While whatever model is being implemented, if it leads to more respect, to more understanding, to having people saying, well, that was nice, then probably it's a good model or has good elements. The second criteria would be the supply and all the quality assurance mechanisms, the accreditation, all the standards, the training standards, making sure that there is integrity in the system. Like, you know, you have, perhaps, just to give an example, you have an external assessor who's assessing the performance of a mediator. You don't have the same person who trained and perhaps even received the training fee, doing also the assessment and finalizing, and basically having some sort of conflict of interest. So when the regulator is accrediting mediator Vikram in that country, there should be a model where the mediator was assessed not only by the training organization, but also at least one person from outside the training organization, just to make sure that there is integrity in the system. But there are several other supply mechanisms, including adopting training standards, accrediting trainers, accrediting training organizations, making sure that there is a continuous professional development system, but an effective one, not like a formal one where we're just, you know, sending each other certificates. I send you one for 20 hours, you send me one for 20 hours, and we're all happy, and we can, you know, we will get it done in 5 minutes. It's all fine. It's okay. And we've seen these things happening. And the third dimension, the third criteria, is it looks at the ecosystem generally, all these different elements, just to make sure. So this is our methodology, at least as ADR Center, making sure that all these three criteria, all these factors are carefully addressed. And then in terms of the cycle, you start with the technical development, as I mentioned. You make sure that there is enough conversation with policymakers so that they understand why a certain format is important. Then you engage all the stakeholders so they adopt the final product, and that they would have had access and or chance to offer input to, so they feel kind of the owners. And then you monitor for a year or two. Start small and go slow, and then at the end of this monitoring period, you decide what to do next. So there is really an application that can be controlled. You're not going to expose yourself. You're not going to go too large, too fast from the beginning. You take it step by step, put one step in front of the other, make sure that you have a good monitoring mechanism. That is absolutely critical, and the use of technology is essential, so that you make sure that there are no certificates being sold. You want to go to court, come to me. I'll give you a certificate. We'll say that you attended the first meeting and you'll be fine. I'll give you a discount. I mean, you don't have to give me the full fee. So we've seen these things happening. If you can create a system that prevents these things from happening, then you have a good model. And that's why the use of technology is important, because everything then is transparent. You know, like when everything is transparent, when you pull those statistics and say, you know, whatever mediation center X had 1,500 requests last year. There are 2 mediators, so how can they manage 600 mediations each? A question mark. But even the bigger question mark, they have 0 settlements, or 1,500 requests, 0 mediations and 0 settlements. Something is not right. So probably you shouldn't get to that point in the first place where you have that. So having that ability to monitor the system so that you can come in as early as possible is it makes sense also. So that's all I can offer in 5 minutes, like overarching themes rather than specific.
I mean, no, this is a discussion. Of course, there are lots to discuss. So we'll take it up later. We'll have more of these conversations. On 19th, there's a workshop. Please, if you get time, just drop in for some time if you can, because I definitely have my thoughts on how it has to go. I mean, in the sense, I'm not saying I have those thoughts. I'm just saying generally the way I look at it is that everything doesn't, first of all, need to be legislated. That one part.
True.
Legislators themselves are not, they don't have any quality concept. There's no certification. The people do it. It's trust of the people. So I'm saying mediators also, it's the trust of the people. We have to be able to create that atmosphere to be able to explain, but that's a lot of discussion. So because Alberto's here, so I'll, of course, Adi, like I said, always a pleasure. And we'll continue the discussion as we go along. There'll be lots of ideas, thoughts, which will come up from here. Then we'll take it up forward. So thank you very much. And I'll see you soon then. Yep.
Thank you very much for having me, Vikram. All the best to everyone.
Thanks. Let me close this. Let's get Alberto in.